Hey there everyone, it's Joe from Ainsley's Gold Silver Standard Insights, brought to you by goldsilverstandard.com and ainsleyBullion.com.au. Today's topic is Credit Suisse on life support, bail-in alert. Now that's posted on the Ainsley website. I'll put a link below for you to follow along. Of course, we have Chris Tipper here to break down the morning's news. And joining Chris today is regular contributor and Ainsley team member, Branko Radunovic. So gentlemen, over to you.
Thanks, Joe. A couple of weeks ago now, Branko joined us to talk about the risks unfolding with Credit Suisse, the second largest Swiss bank. Since then, we now appear to be facing a real prospect of a bank run after it was announced last night that during the first few weeks of this quarter alone, they saw a capital outflow of $88.3 billion, which consequently saw their share price drop to the lowest point in over 30 years. So it's timely to have Branko joining us again today to break down these latest developments and help us understand this latest round of contagion in a bit more context. So welcome back, Branko.
Thanks for having me back on.
All right, let's dig into this because it's really interesting. We were just talking a little bit before we recorded this, and there's some fascinating stuff that I wasn't aware of that you dug into. So before we get into the nitty gritty, can you just give us the big picture overview of probably a little bit of a summary of what you'd said previously, but also where we are right now?
Yep. So basically, there were rumors circulating on Twitter that Credit Suisse was in financial strife. Mm-hmm. That turned out to be true. The share market responded and, hammered its price down. It's down 60% so far this year. And, now we're at a position where with this new news that came out where they've lost, 88 billion of capital outflows, that they could be in kind of severe strife. And specifically the past week or so, we've seen a huge increase in this Fed swap line. So the Fed is giving money to the Swiss National Bank. And the most likely reason for that is that they're helping Credit Suisse. Because you see, it's like at the start of the year, there's a bit of the swap line account being used, and this massive spike very recently when all this trouble with Credit Suisse has occurred. So we've kind of got a situation here where they're maybe not getting bailed out, but they're getting help from the American, the Fed. And it's just an absolute chaotic situation at the moment.
That is fascinating because this is really, at the end of the day, a normal, bank that's running out of Switzerland, that you would think doesn't have a direct link to the US and the US markets. But here you've got the Fed not directly, but indirectly assisting, or at least it seems that way, by the swap line set up with the Swiss government. So that's pretty crazy. They
are on the NASDAQ, the Credit Suisse Group. So I guess there is some kind of tie there. But yeah, they are a Swiss investment bank, the second biggest in Switzerland. And it's very odd to see another government entity kind of stabilize them. And it kind of shows that if this were to have a big FTX style collapse, let's say, it's going to have significant ripple effects on a global level that will extend, well past just Switzerland or probably even the US.
Sure. So let's talk about that a little bit more because that's interesting when you talk about FTX. So we've just been through, and we're still going through, this idea of contagion when we've had FTX collapse and realize all of the associated entities that we're lending or borrowing from. And you can imagine this is much bigger on a much larger scale when you're talking about something like Credit Suisse. So can you maybe give us some of the similarities and differences that you can see between these two situations?
So I think the kind of obvious similarities is that we've both had this contagion impact where, with FTX, for example, they had a certain number of customer deposits that they could refund, but when everyone kind of went at once, obviously it collapsed. And we saw with Credit Suisse the past few weeks alone, 10% of their wealth management, department, that capital got outflowed. So you've got 10% of the total capital of wealthy investors that have their money tied up in Credit Suisse, they're gone. So I think that we could see, I don't want to say similar to FTX in terms of the collapse because it's quite a crazy situation, but there's nothing necessarily stopping us from seeing a similar contagion-like impact. And then some other kind of key similarities and differences between the two is I mean, a key difference I think would be there's a lot more trust and institutional trust, obviously, with Credit Suisse, as we're seeing with this swap line. And FTX doesn't have that, so it would make a Credit Suisse contagion impact less likely to occur. And it's very interesting to see them both play out, as like you've got traditional finance here, crypto here, and it's very interesting to see the differences and the similarities of both, all the players involved, including, we'll talk about shortly, I think, the governmental bodies, the institutions, and then depositors as well. So yeah, very interesting situation.
And I think it's really interesting as well, just to understand this concept, because bank runs have been around for a long time. When you have leverage in a system, and it can be as small as 10% in this case of their money flows out, well, it can be a house of cards, so that if that 10% is not there, that can have that's where this contagion comes from.
Yes.
But if you've got loans on loans, it becomes very complicated. And that's what we saw being the case in the FTX situation, where you had the moment money started flowing out, there just wasn't enough capital left, because it wasn't that they were necessarily insolvent at that point, but the assets they were holding weren't liquid, so they couldn't just get them out. If everyone has a run on the bank, the assets aren't there. And I imagine that would be the same situation here, with the more traditional bank.
Quick note on that, actually, that they came out today and said that their capital reserves are actually below like the legal limit, and they needed a top up, which is presumably why they're potentially using this swap line.
Right. So it might be more about liquidity rather than they don't have it. So they might have, in theory, the one-to-one backing, as we're hearing in the crypto space. They might have the money and the assets there, but that doesn't mean they can sell them.
Similar to an FTT token of sorts, as we saw last week, where FTX held their money in FTT that they couldn't sell. Maybe Credit Suisse could have a similar issue with all their assets tied up in
all sorts of places. Very interesting. I'd also like to get your perspective on this, because I know you're quite interested in it, about how the media covers this, because we've seen I'm just mind-boggling what's gone on this morning, where we've had in the FTX situation, SBF, so the CEO of that company, who for all we can tell has committed serious crime, saying, I'll be on stage next week speaking at a conference in the US. Crazy. And it's almost like the mainstream media picks that up quite differently from what anyone who was involved in it knows is going on. I know you're interested in this, so what's your sort of take on the difference between how the media is picking up this story when you're talking about something like Credit Suisse and comparing it to something in the crypto space?
Yeah, I think we got two elements there. So the first one is on SBF in particular. The New York Times did a bit of a fluff piece on him, and they just absolutely, when they wrote about it in the New York Times, they just absolutely were very kind to him. We can say, no mention of fraud, no mention of anything. So for whatever reason, traditional media loves SBF, which doesn't really make sense because he's defrauded investors worth, for billions of dollars. And now this guy, wants to speak at an event when he should be in jail. So, I mean, here's, another case. But what I find particularly interesting is, how the media treats this traditional finance contagion versus FTX. So there's a lot of fear, and rightfully so, of the wrongdoing in the crypto markets, that we've seen. And, I think that's for the most part probably accurate. Mm-hmm. However, we're not seeing that equivalent level of fear with this Credit Suisse situation, an equivalent level of, irresponsibility, right? People are saying FTX is a scam the whole time, blah, blah, blah. But people aren't saying, Credit Suisse were at the very least extremely over leveraged or irresponsible. So I think it's very interesting to see the differences in the media viewpoints and probably the lack of coverage on the Credit Suisse situation as a whole. People aren't talking about it enough. And the fact that, taxpayers should be aware, American taxpayers should be aware they're potentially giving, billions of dollars through the swap line. So,
well, there's no transparency there, at least none that you've been able to find so far, is there?
No, it's more an implied connection between the two than.
And that's the danger in these situations, because you don't know who's on the hook to who, do you?
Correct. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So what do you sort of see then as the outcome here? Is there a solution beyond collapse? Like what happens in a situation like this for Credit Suisse?
I think it is going to be extremely dangerous for Credit Suisse, mainly because of the lack of trust. And, I'm thinking if I was someone who was very wealthy and wanted to put their money in a Swiss bank, why on earth would I choose Credit Suisse right now? It makes zero sense. Under what circumstance, if you're a wealthy individual with all the opportunities in the world at your feet, why wouldn't you choose a UBS or a Julius Baer, who have both seen, I think UBS has seen a $17 billion increase into the wealth management fund since June. So people are, already kind of seeing the light, taking out of Credit Suisse and putting it into its competitors. So I think with that lack of trust and with an increase in, customer deposits, like we saw in FTX, if everyone withdraws and no one puts their money in, then it's kind of difficult to maintain that business. So, I'm not necessarily predicting anything, but I just think that it's the outcome, of some kind of, extreme default event is a lot more likely than the media and the public are probably thinking with respect to Credit Suisse at the moment.
And the corresponding flow on contagion.
Yeah, that's another interesting similarity that we could see as well with, if Credit Suisse collapses, anyone who had dealings with them could be on the hook as well.
Yeah, and that could impact us here. We wouldn't know, and that's the difficulty in these situations. Well, fascinating as always. So thank you for your deep dive on that, and certainly opening my eyes to a bit of that information. I wasn't aware of things like the swap lines really blowing out, which don't prove anything at this point, but certainly it's a very interesting correlation that's going on there, and one that deserves a bit closer look, I think. But thanks a lot for that, and we'll keep watching, and we'll talk to you and see how it's going next week.
Sounds good.
All right, thanks,
See you next time. Bye.
Thank you, Branko, for joining us. And Chris, I'll see you on the next one. And for the audience, I want you to head over to the Discord channel. That's discord.gg/gold to continue the conversation. Chris and Branko will be there for the next 1 or 2 hours after the upload of this video. So head over there, ask your questions, get a response, and let us know your feedback. We really want to hear from you. I always want you to subscribe to the YouTube channel. That's youtube.com/Ainsley Bullion for the wide range of informational videos we put out 5 days a week, including specials and more. And while you're on the internet, head over to goldsilverstandard.com, because that's bringing gold and silver into the digital world. As we say here at the end, balance your wealth in an unbalanced world. Take care, and we'll see you next time.